Bonjour, soyez tous
Hello,
les bienvenus
you are
sur
very
les
welcome
bancs
here
de la
to follow
seconde
this
table du
debate
forum
of the second stage
Métamorphoses
of
humaines,
the forum
agissons l'homme et les
Metamorphosis for the
changements,
World.
quelle
How far
boussole
can
pour
mankind
l'éducation?
change human
Le
beings?
travail du
What compass for
CCIC
education?
a retenu l'attention
The
de Madame Azoulay, directrice générale de
ICCC work
l'UNESCO,
has
car
drawn the
la
attention of
réflexion
Mrs.
sur l'éthique autour des
Azoulay
usages
at
de la technologie
UNESCO
et singulièrement de
because this
l'intelligence
technology
artificielle
of
sont au cœur des
artificial
préoccupations de
intelligence
l'UNESCO.
are at the heart of the
Ainsi, Madame
concerns of
Azoulay
UNESCO.
a
So
accordé le
Mrs.
partenariat de
Azoulay
l'UNESCO à
gave
ce
sponsorship
forum
of
en
UNESCO to
nommant
this
pour
forum
interlocuteur
and
Madame
giving us
Gabriela
speakers
Ramos,
such as Gabriela
sous-directrice
Ramos,
générale pour
Assistant
les sciences
Director General
humaines et
for Social
sociales.
and Human
Ce
Sciences.
secteur couvre un
This
large
sector
éventail de missions à
covers a
l'UNESCO,
great
comme bien
range
sûr la
of missions at
bioéthique et l'éthique des
at
sciences et des
UNESCO, such as
technologies, avec la
bioethics
mission de
and science
préparer, depuis
technology,
presque
in
10
order
ans,
to
un
prepare for the
outil
last
normatif
2 years
sur
a
l'éthique de l'IA.
normative tool
Mais
for
aussi,
this.
ce secteur
As
s'est
well,
très
this
préoccupé par
sector
la
is
jeunesse,
very
les
concerned
filles,
about the
l'accès à
youth,
l'école des
girls,
jeunes femmes,
access for
les défis,
education for women and
l'inclusion et la
girls,
paix,
inclusion and
et
peace,
aussi le sport,
and as well
bien sûr.
sports.
Je remercie chaleureusement
I
Madame Gabriela
thank
Ramos pour son service
warmly
comme
Gabriela
orateur
Ramos for
toujours
her work
bienveillant
and
durant la
for
période de
her
préparation de
welcome
cet événement.
during the preparation of
Aujourd'hui,
this work.
ayant un impératif
Today,
évoqué
since
loin
there
de nous,
is
elle
an
se fera
imperative
représenter à
event
la
that
table
keeps her far away
ronde
from
par
us, she's
Maxime Carliou,
represented by Maxime
spécialiste de
Karliuk,
programme pour l'IRA,
specialist
qui de
of
plus
program for
avait eu
ERA,
l'extrême
and as
gentillesse
well, she was very
d'enregistrer un
kind
message
to
d'ouverture
record a
expliquant ces
welcoming note
préoccupations
talking
essentielles.
about her
Elle montre
concerns.
ainsi sa
Therefore,
confiance
she
et son
shows her
intérêt
confidence
pour
and her
notre
interest
coopération
for our
dans nos travaux
cooperation in
qui
our
nous
common
réunissent.
work.
Je me fais donc le porte-parole du
Therefore, I am the
CCIC maintenant
speaker
pour
for the
remercier les intervenants experts
ICCC
qui vont
to thank the
dialoguer
expert who will
grâce
have a
au
dialogue.
modérateur François
Thanks
Proutot,
to the
notre ami.
moderator François
François est le
Proutot, our
président de
friend.
fondation
François
et
is the
membre
chair
de
of
la plateforme du
Fondatio
CCIC.
and a member
Il est chercheur
within the
associé à
ICCC.
l'Université
He is a
d'Angers
researcher at
en
the
sciences de
Catholic
l'éducation.
University
Il
of
est l'auteur
Angers
de
and
plusieurs
a
publications sur
doctor in
l'intelligence
education
artificielle,
science.
le
He has worked many
transhumanisme
works
et en
on artificial
particulier tout récemment, il a
intelligence
publié
and humanism,
Éduquer
and
l'homme
he has
orienté.
published
Je vous souhaite une
recently
très bonne session.
Éduquer l'homme
Je
orienté. I
passe
wish you an
maintenant
excellent session,
micro à
and I'll
Madame
give the
Gabriela
floor
Ramos.
to Ms. Gabriela Ramos.
Welcome, everyone. I am delighted to open this webinar as part of the forum Metamorphoses of the World. Today's topic is artificial intelligence, one of the most pervasive technologies ever. AI has the potential to transform the future for the better through new tools. It is remarkable, for example, that AI generated some of the earliest alerts about the COVID-19 outbreak, and its analytical capacity has helped accelerate the discovery of the vaccines. Now, self-learning algorithms are playing an increasingly important role in our efforts to recover from the current crisis. But even way before COVID, the impact on AI on societies has been incredible. New educational tools are allowing kids and students to learn at their own pace. Doctors are able to provide their patients with treatment that is more tailored to their needs. And AI is helping in mitigating climate change by forecasting energy demand and reducing waste. This is just amazing. However, the same tools bring downside risks and very key challenges. Malicious use of AI can threaten digital, physical, and political security, and actually they have already done in many instances. Unintended failures are also a threat with long track record. We have already experienced market crashes caused by intelligent trading software, accidents caused by self-driving cars, and embarrassment from chatbots engaged in hate speech. It is predicted that both the frequency and the seriousness of such events will steadily increase as AI systems become more capable. The outlined issues require clear understanding of the technologies. But more than anything, they require a deep ethical reflection. This reflection is not an intellectual exercise. It provides what the concrete, actionable compass to address the challenges we confront. And this is why UNESCO is engaged in advancing a recommendation on ethics of AI. A recommendation that will pave the path for equal, fair, and just use for these technologies. The vision of the recommendation is shared with the one of the International Catholic Center of Cooperation with UNESCO, which is to put the human being at the very center of the world and to focus on the dignity of each individual, to focus on human rights, to focus on protecting what is dear to all us humans, and to advance a new understanding of the emerging issues. I would actually want to share with you one very specific example where we really need to change things. The artificial technologies need to ensure clear diversity and clear inclusivity. But currently, there is a lack of women participation in the AI sector. Only 22% of AI professionals globally are female. Only 18% of speakers at the leading conference in the AI field are women. And less than 14% of AI papers are authored by women. So it's a world that is not very inclusive. Gender biases are also often present in AI datasets, which can spread and reinforce harmful gender stereotypes and risk, further stigmatizing and marginalizing women on a global scale. This is why the UNESCO recommendation has a policy area, very strong one, dedicated to gender, and it puts the focus on striking the need to increase diversity in the field of AI, ensuring that women and girls and all the underrepresented groups are not only participating equally in the development of these tools, but also benefiting equally from the technology, which is not the case. We need action. Webinars like these are really going to help us to identify the pressing issues that we should be focusing on and debating the implementable solutions that should be adopted. So I wish you luck in this discussion, and thank you very much for inviting us.
Aujourd'hui, à l'heure des nouvelles technologies,
Today, in the era of new technologies, to have a global speech on mankind in his complexity is a difficult task. The artificial intelligence, AI, is paradigmical. It's come out of labs in the last century and is spread in our daily life. It's become universal and all-powerful, as it was very well said by our last speakers of our first webinar on the 8th of April. This revolution is not only technical, but as well cognitive and epistemological. It talks about the relationship with our knowledge and how we can have a relationship with this status and the knowledge. Anything can be open. So there are ethical questions. This is our vision. What is mankind? Where is man in this situation? Will man do his own honey with this AI, or in the opposite, will it actually eliminate mankind and eliminate mankind? This question is at the heart of our debate today. The artificial intelligence will it remake mankind, and how far can it go? How can it answer to our needs? We have to rethink mankind from this individual revolution, and it has an amazing impact, which is anthropological, and ask ethical questions. This anthropological impact has therefore an influence on several categories of mankind when it comes to human nature, human condition, and human adventure. These questions, with several angles of approaches, we are going to try to answer them today with the help of several experts, French, German, Ivorian, or Canadian. They're all very close to the concern of UNESCO, which was reminded by Mrs. Ramos. It's about the world metamorphosis and the future of humanity impacted by technoscience and artificial intelligence. Thanks to the 6 experts, we are going to see this reflection develop and have exchanges, and thanks to your questions, we will have a nice debate. So I will introduce the first speakers. First of all, Christophe Wolff in Berlin. He is an anthropologist and as a philosopher in education. He is co-founder of the interdisciplinary Center for Historical Anthropology at the Free University of Berlin. He's going to help us to think about the impact of the digital culture on the vision of mankind, and he's going to talk about what are the issues, and he's going to question how the digital revolution can help to develop a relationship which will be less violent with nature and with others and with themselves, human beings. There'll be as well Nathanael Wallenhorst. He is a researcher and doctor of science in education, and he's a researcher at the moment about educative consequences and political consequences of Anthropocene, which is the impact of human activities on the planet ecosystems. So Nathanael is going to think about this impact, talk about the human adventure, which is modified by the technosciences and the artificial intelligence. What is this mutation? What is at stake? And he has written a book about this. The human adventure has just started. Christopher Wolff, please, you can talk. Thank you so much for your invitation. I am very, very happy to be among you. And I'm going to speak French, but in our exchanges, we can speak English, no problem. First of all, I would like to have 3 topics before I read you my introductory presentation. Thesis. First of all, let's not limit the concept to an ecological concept or biological concept. We need to see that it's a dynamism which is signified by this concept, which is rather large and which really covers all the various scopes, cultural scopes, for example, and social scopes. Anthropocene, for example, is a central problem for the future. And what is it? Is violence between nature. That's obvious. Violence between human beings is very obvious. And violence against ourselves. That's the second thesis. Third thesis, we must not limit the idea of Anthropocene to a critics. We must see that we need to develop an approach which will be constructive. Otherwise, you will be like in Frankfurt, that it's say good to criticize is good, but you need to go into action. And in many countries throughout the world, I can see this happening. So now I can give you my text. In the Greek antiquity, man was understood as part of thesis, and in the Middle Age, he was a divine creature, covering everything. With modern age and industrialization, man has come out of a divine creation. The world was no longer a world that he had to face. Human nature was divided. The world became an object. Anthropocene, that shows how far this separation has become a problem. First, so far, it was inconceivable. Nature is very impacted by human beings. Therefore, there is no more nature which has not been influenced by mankind. Nature and the integration of each other constitutes legacy for mankind, and legacy starts with past, but there is a great importance for present and for future. Each generation will shape in a creative way his legacy, his natural legacy, and as well his cultural legacy. It has to be understood in the impregnation of each other and make it fruitful for the future generations. The multitude of forms, the diversity of creativity is a basic condition for the common legacy of our world. Therefore, it's an education mission for this present generation and the future generation. We must understand how much the sharing of legacy is so important and how easy it is to endanger this legacy and even to destroy it. This is a term which is very wild. It's about the material world and the immaterial world, and individuals and communities and humanities find it very important. This situation leads to a new understanding of nature and of mankind as well through a very important change of anthropology, education and training. When we understand Anthropocene, it's not enough to consider only the numerous negative impact of industrialization on environment. And in what we want a climate change, or we see all the destruction of ecosystem and the biochemistry changes and the destruction of oceans and pollution and the world destruction as well. We must add other developments linked to the dynamics of the effects of Anthropocene. For example, the machine world. Secondly, the digital transformation, including the artificial intelligence and robotics. Thirdly, genetics and biotechnology. These instances show that we need to broaden this concept of Anthropocene rather than reducing it. In an ecological context, Anthropocene context characterize a new global vision of the world for all the social and cultural areas. Let's try to clarify this broadening, which is very important regarding this concept. First of all, the machine world, then the industrialization. Anthropocene is characterized by the discovery of machines in all areas of life, the developing as well of efficacy of actions and fighting for the world. The relationship between men and machines is complex, and we find there a relationship between them. So therefore, the machines are no longer simple objects for mankind. They become actors. And it's not only determined by the actions of men, but as well these machines determine as well actions and behaviors of mankind. Through robotic development and artificial intelligence, we have created a more intense relationship between man and machine. Now the digital transformation, all the computers have crossed the border far beyond the world of machines. So, however, this concept of artificial intelligence is quite controversial. Is it supposed to qualify to have machine learning, or shouldn't we rather talk about intelligent machines? This type of artificial intelligence fosters mankind activity in many social areas. All these machines is going to transform our social life and economics and the working world. Systems based on IT data is extremely important for technology that can be used in several areas and many areas. We can talk about a transformation, digital transformation for the era of Anthropocene. Not only social areas where this digital transformation and AI would have a lot of effect. For example, at the moment, oral interaction between machine and man, as well the vending machine and the robots, the lawyers' robots, health and as well disaster. Thirdly, genetics and biotechnology. One of the characteristics for man is about that the various distinction of biospheres are losing selectivity when it comes hybrid changes. Genetics or genetic research is a great example to show the growing power of man over biospheres. In this development, we can identify 4 important markers that show how far is going this development. The discovery of the structure of DNA in 1953, cloning of the first mammal of the sheep in 1996, the project of a human genome, and decrypting of the genetic legacy and various different discoveries in 2015 and the different redirection of genes, and it was part of the Nobel Prize in 2020. 2 last theses to talk about. First of all, sustainability is a big topic, and its efforts are very important to improve the situation of Anthropocene, thanks to strategic action and a systematic action. So we hope to reach this through a necessary transformation. With the vision of sustainable change and of education to reach this, is this a great topic in the sense that Jean-François Lyotard described it, a narrative in order to see that the necessary change has to happen. Such a vision offers a great degree of satisfaction and is submitted to the action program of 2030. We will have improved then things as far as we know, and we know what has to be done, and we are beginning to have great actions in this sense. It's possible that this awareness will help actions, sustainable actions. The strategy, the sustainable strategy, tries to change narratives in a big societal change. However, there is a question: how can we know how far, because of the social resistance, how can this plan be fulfilled or achieved? And last point, sustainable change. Is it an utopia? In order to assess the possibility of an achievement of this SDG, implying an analysis of a great utopia or great European dreams. Plato talked about this Sun Society or the Thomas More utopia. In these utopias, we see a great representation of an ideal community, showing what could be done if mankind if human beings were not what they are like, and if utopia could be realized. All utopia seem to limit diversity and contradiction, which is inherent to human life, and to foster a social order. Indeed, utopia for a sustainable change is multidimensional and utopic. However, we can ask ourselves if the fulfillment could lead to restrictions of human rights and fundamental rights, and these restrictions against the destruction, which is really a threat for mankind. We need to think how far these restrictions are compatible with human rights. These attempts of reforms, are they a danger to discern in the dialectics of the reason, to produce the opposite of the initial intention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christophe. It was it was great. Thank you very much to the ICCC for this invitation, and thank you for the work that was carried out by ICCC in the last few years. Well, it was great. We are a carrier of hope during this period of transformation. Well, so thank you very much for all the transformations that have been carried out. I would like to continue with this introduction by Christophe Wolff, and my presentation, my part is about the accompaniment of mutation. We continue, we adapt, and we continue transform in order to continue living. Well, we are talking about human mutation. Well, we are talking about our way of processing information up to our death. Well, and then we have to give our life to other people. This also applies to politics. Well, our world has changed a lot. We have limits of interest, space, and all the other spaces that are transforming and are being sold, regulated by craziness of people. So this transhuman is limiting the mutation of the planet in which we live. Yes, our planet is transforming itself, and we are also transforming ourselves. So if this is the first challenge in the 21st century, we have to define also the borders and the boundaries. Sometimes we refuse determinism, and we think about other limits like death, for example, human beings, and also we seek our happiness by eliminating any kind of limits. Well, I decided to think about the future of human beings. Well, we are talking about Anthropocene. Christophe Wolff talked about that, this new geological epoch due to the impact of human activities on the Earth system as a whole. The Anthropocene is here an anthropological analyzer or revelator. It highlights how much the human of modernity has behaved as a Homo economicus who seeks to maximize his individual interests, and as a Homo faber whose production, shaping of matter, trying out any type of verification precedes a thought. A human who needs to do in order to think. Homo economicus and Homo faber intertwined. We are really dealing here with the Promethean individual of modernity, an individual who seeks the increase of his power, whatever the transgressions of limits. This is the anthropological characteristic that is expressed through the digital and techno-scientific revolution and artificial intelligence. In other words, the human revealed by Anthropocene is that human which underlines the frantic race at the heart of contemporary techno-scientific research, of which the merger with AI materializes a climax. The Anthropocene is here particularly structuring to think in an anthropological perspective our relationship to technosciences and artificial intelligence, imagining an anthropological mutation that is not carried out against the biosphere, but with it, in order to allow for the sustainability of the human adventure, which is today compromised, comes down to drawing the contours of a human being who is no longer alienated by the imperative of increasing his or her power through the technoscience. This does not mean in any way a return to the past or the aim of a pro-modern human. So we really think become other than we are, and this will bring about an improvement and also a radical change and shift in the way in which we coexist among human beings. This is a political mutation, and it deals with the space among us and between us, and this also brings about the importance of words. Well, this is not based on an alteration of technosciences, but it's a relationship with the human beings, something that is powerful and cannot be controlled. So it is important to think about this, about the notion of human adventure that modifies our relationship to technosciences and AI. So we don't have to be afraid to think humanity starting from a breath or from a movement. Well, how can we think that thinking about human becoming in reference to the notion of human adventure modifies our relationship to technosciences, human adventure? And this is a component concerning human condition, and this is very topical also for technosciences, but we have to make reference to the notion of human adventure because we have a relationship to technosciences and nature and AI. So this is a solidarity that we live, and this is necessary to position our mankind and in order to have a better understanding of human beings. This also deals with the human adventure based on the component of uncertainty and the trajectory of human beings. So this is a kind of something cross-cutting for all human beings and also human nature that also brings about the sharing of human beings, their uncertainties. We are talking about the notion that is quite close to the Odyssey, as Christophe Wolff said, and this was also developed by Francois. So this idea materializes the threat in front of which we are. So it deals with all the humankind, and we need to show solidarity. And this also deals with the different human species. I talk about human species, and it also hides our social and cultural differences. So this anthropological issue is processed based on the work of Hannah Arendt. The experience of camps, for example, Hannah Arendt also talked about that and was very prudent about human nature. So it is this condition of human beings. And it was also subject to different contagions. Arendt also raises that topic for spatial race, and this also deals with Earth. And she says that the most radical change that we can imagine for human conditions would be immigration to another planet. And this event, which is not impossible, would mean that human beings should live in different conditions from which we are living. She said that in 1958. This is still human, and this is something that we can say about their nature. And this means that we are conditioned by whatever we are surrounded by. This is something that is done by human beings. Today, we are these travelers, as Hannah Arendt, and we are this is something that we see everywhere, also for the genetic characteristics, but also Anthropocene, and that this is also something that there's no equal examples in our society. We have some external elements, the system in which we take part, and other elements that are produced by human beings, and for example, artificial intelligence. So mankind cannot be defined in a classical way, starting from what it can become, also within the environment that was created. The term adventure comes from Latin. Adventure means that it's something that must arrive, something that must take place. So the advena, so something that will, and adventitious, something that comes from outside. In the actual meaning of this word, we think about a human adventure. It's something that takes place. And today we don't know anything about this problem for Anthropocene and also technosciences augmentation of human power. Second term, human has the same root as humus, that is earth. Human beings are people that bring earth from the soil, and the Latin root is different, but the meaning is the same, earth. Mankind has to understand how to mobilize its power from the environmental and from the anthropological point of view. And this is something that comes from our reality. Well, then we have to think about human adventure. So it modifies our relationship to technoscience and AI. It de-economizes and de-individualizes what is at stake in order to politicize is understood as the circulation of the word, allowing the emergence of concerted action that comes to put the hybris, the destructive madness of the excess under the good guard of the collective, the coexistence, the sharing of the conviviality. It also repositioned what is possible in relation to the desirable future of human life in society. If some are responsible for the anthropological uncertainties of the future, all are concerned by this destiny. This passage from the human condition to the human adventure has as its mission to accompany an anthropological mutation. Well, that's it from my side. Thank you.
Merci au professeur Wolff.
Thank you, Mr. Wolff, and thank you, Nathaniel Wallenhorst, for these introductory contributions. Well, concerning all these questions, which are very important, the anthropological impact and all the new technology of artificial intelligence. Well, we will have the same thing with our next speakers, and we will have a Q&A session. So please share your questions online so that we can also talk about that and try to have an exchange of ideas, starting from the contributions about human conditions and all these spaces, for example, whatever we have to create. And this is something that also deals with the creative this creative breath. Well, we will have other speakers now. Now I would like to leave the floor to the Canada speaker, Marie-Hélène Parizeau. Marie-Hélène Parizeau is a Quebec philosopher specializing in morality and applied ethics. She is an assistant professor at Laval University. She was a member and then president of COMES, the World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology of UNESCO. She's also the author of a work whose title is very interesting and insightful, La Société robotisée, enjeux éthiques et politiques, the robotic society, ethical and political issues. Well, this is part of our program. We will leave the floor to Professor Marie-Hélène Parizeau about robotization of our society and the technosciences on the impact on human relationships and also the transformation of freedom, of equality, or take part in the emergence of new vulnerabilities in our society among young people. Well, this is a problem that is quite interesting, and this will be also the topic of our next seminar. You have the floor, Mrs. Parizeau.
Merci.
Thank you.
Oui, alors bonjour, merci de votre...
So, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you for your invitation. I would like to say that I was president of COMES. There is another president now. I was president of UNESCO, of the World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology. Just to introduce my topic, I will ask a question which is a provocation, actually, well, about artificial intelligence in particular, and also asking this question, well, artificial intelligence, is it something anti-humanist, something against humanity? And this is something, this is just a provocation, as I told you. And well, this is just a draft, let's say. What do we mean by anti-humanism? Well, I will just give you an idea, a taste of that. And Jean-Pierre Dupuy has talked about that. Well, I would just would like to sum up anti-humanism. Well, there is an excess in the gap between science and technology against the human beings. Well, Jean-Pierre Dupuy talked about that. And he said the inhuman is something mechanical. So it's a kind of reduction of anti-humanism, limitation to technology and science. But yeah, philosophers know that there was also an answer to this protection of anti-humanism of Jean-Paul Sartre. And they talked about all these destroying facts, for example, talking about metaphysics, for example, and also hypertrophy of willingness and self-conscience and awareness. Well, and this is something that obliges us to think what is man in a technical system. So this is the question I would like to ask you. Well, I would like to raise two topics. The first one is about the pandemic, COVID-19. We have foretastes, well, of numeric, of digital systems. So, well, the use of digital technologies as a system in the terms of Jacques Ellul, I'm going to base my intervention upon. The second topic deals with artificial intelligence. And I will talk about what it changes in the conception of freedom and decision-making, with decision-making and also the idea of responsibility. So ethic elements, if you want, which are here, and I will try to develop them very, very fast. Well, artificial intelligence as a first topic. Well, I think there are some people among us talking about the impact of technologies and the pandemic on in some sectors, for example, home office, telework, etc. And in order to accelerate the all digital and the model of digital society of tomorrow, so future society, what we could see is that the pandemic also accelerated this vulnerability from the social point of view and from the institutional point of view that we already had. And but we also have other phenomena, so the accentuation of digital systems. So we could see that this digital divide was developed and accentuated by the crisis. Well, the access to basic know-how, and we have different stakeholders and population in which there is no literacy. So they are completely illiterate from the technological point of view. Then we have the access to digital devices, computers, and mobile phones, headsets, etc., etc., etc. And then also the access to the internet, for example, which is also a problem from several points of view. And we can see that we have different aspects. So we have digital solutions that were intensified. We can make a list which is quite impressive. So telework and also higher education, so online courses, industrial culture industry, films and video games, and also tracking applications and the use of social media. So here we have have an expansion, we have an intensification that was developed during COVID. Well, we see that all these digital solutions have also an economic condition, so individual and the collective capacities and the possibility to have a freedom in terms of use of technologies. So this is a point in common with the previous speakers in their analysis of the Homo economicus. So what can we take away from this phenomenon of intensification and the digitization of our society, of our Western society? We can say that the multiplication of digital solutions also favors the intensification of relationships in the world in virtual terms. So someone I can get in touch with, I talk to you, I talk to my computer, even if I know that you are somewhere, but we have no contact and there is no interpersonal contact. Well, just to go quite fast, I would like talk about some of the characteristics of the technical system. This is a technical system. Well, every element is adapted to the technician system. Well, it is not by chance that the function is not just based on human needs, but it is also based on a social order. So technology is based on automatisms, even if at the beginning nothing is fixed and there are some differences, something that is also tested before the imposition of the universe. So this is something from a social point of view. And the best technique is the one that starts with the identification of needs. So this is something that is effective, as Lul explains. This is based on the choice of techniques and the adaptation of environments to techniques and the elimination of non-technical activities to the detriment of other activities. So this last point is very important. I would like to insist on that. Well, and this is something that is based on rational needs, elimination of activities, of non-technical activities, well, for the benefit of technical activities. This means that the digital aspects and artificial intelligence leads to the interpersonal distance and for the benefit of a technical solution. So this kind of social distancing is it brings and leads to more individualism. And at our university, well, we have remote learning, and they know what it means. So this is a kind of individualism, people that just are closed in themselves. And this is also deals with the conviviality of people and the relationship and the interpersonal relationships, for example. So this distance of digital techniques come from on the deal with and go hand in hand with different stimuli. Well, I would like to show that there is a distancing of human relationship, as Elu shows, talking about the characteristics of techniques and technologies. So the question that we could ask ourselves is that we could also mention different aspects of anti-humanism, but there is no question on that. It is a distancing, it is a distanciation from this point of view, interpersonal distancing due to digital technologies. Second point, what are we talking about? Conception of human beings. Artificial intelligence deals with aspects that I will mention now. We have a lot of different discourse on the utility and the usefulness of artificial intelligence, the positive impact on the society, a lot of different social aspects for mankind, for humanity. Well, what do they want to convince us of? Because if we take a look at the literature of post-transhumanist literature, we see that there is a lot of internal reflections that are more and more present starting from 2000. biotechnologies, information technologies, and the collectivism. So all these words were also mentioned by the previous speakers. And starting from 2000, we have also this course that is mentioned by high-level scientists. So nanotechnologies program in America, Michael Hawker. They talked about the new man with big N, capital N, or Renaissance with capital R. So all these topics as if we were talking at the beginning of Italian Renaissance, in which we had the new definition of human beings. So this is quite impressive from this point of view. So the idea of a new humanism in which we also dream of the death by technology and technique. This is what is talked about in this literature. And this is something worth saying because up to now, death was conceived as something that was a condition, a human condition. It was not a problem that should be solved. And here we have the feeling that we are having a shift in terms of perspective. It's not freedom that defines human beings. So we are talking about control perspective, control of techniques, for example, and technologies. This is an adventure, but this is less optimistic than what was described by people up to now. So what can we see? And I would like to stop here. When we are interested in that, we see that it is something that works as something that replaces it. So we have this capacity of replacing people, for example. So this is, well, for example, self-driving cars and whatever it brings about, and also different captors in all senses, in all, and also the military sectors, autonomy, for example, from this point of view, and the capacity of killing human beings. So what we can say is that with deep learning and the calculation of cases, we can't understand the way in which machines generate a decision, for example, for which it have access. It's a kind of a postmodern aspect, as a kind of oracle in which there is someone who gives you the right decision without justification. And here we have the eviction of human beings in the decision-making process. And this is the concept of Guter Anders. So human beings are machines that cannot do as good as well as machines that produce and manufacture. So I don't want to get into details about that because there are a lot of questions, but I can say that when we talk about anti-humanism, we see that there are some distinguishing features in the digital technologies, for example, marginalization of human decisions and the freedom. And I also wanted to show that artificial intelligence is a part of a whole, of a technical whole, so digital techniques and technologies. I think that we should also, you should also read Jacques Luc on this and the reflection for a better understanding of the digital system. Well, now I'm getting to the conclusions or concluding remarks. Well, AI gives us the idea that the freedom can be done without responsibility, the elimination of non-technical activities, as I told you before, and the interpersonal relations, for example, for the benefit of technical activities. So when we solve a technical problem, it doesn't mean that we are taking care of people. The pandemic has talked about that, and this is an important challenge for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Parisot, for enlightening us on the relationship between the AI and humanism and the anti-humanism. And you've helped us to see all these centuries of civilizations from antiquity to Renaissance. And today we're going to talk about with other speakers about the value of a narrative that help us about the mutations. Now I'm going to give the floor to our speaker, who is in UNESCO in Paris. So we're back to Paris. He's an expert for a science social program, Maxime Karluk. And thank you to him for being with us. He's talking about the development of recommendation on the ethics of AI worked on UNESCO. It's a major topic to talk about guidelines in this respect. He is a doctor in law and he focuses on issues linked to simultaneous evolutions of technology linked to AI and as well human beings and societies. He looks at the global view and values and principles and actions to decide what we should allow when it comes to technologies and AI, when it comes to regulations and legal tools. Thank you very much, Maxime Karluk, for being with us. You have the floor.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank
Bonjour.
you so much.
Je
Hello.
vais parler en anglais.
I'm going to speak in English.
All right. Thanks again. So, yeah, indeed, I will be talking a bit about the recommendation that UNESCO is working on and that Gabriela Ramos has mentioned at the beginning. But I would like also to make some sort of framing as well. So, in order to answer the questions posed for this session, I believe it is very much important for us as humanity to formulate the right question about the technology itself. So the way AI has been framed historically and still today, it is in the formulation, can computers do X? And where X varies depending on who is asking the question, mainly. So it traces its origins in the long-standing question of what computers are capable of doing, a question that has driven AI throughout all of its history, and differences in approach, they didn't really matter in this respect. So in its original formulation, this question was proposed by Turing back in the 1950s in his paper, which can be considered the founding document of AI, which was called Can Machines Think? This was an exciting question, of course, motivating AI practitioners towards innovation and pushing the boundaries of the field in new directions. Different schools of thought in AI, despite their differences in approach, they agreed on this question. The contest was mainly to demonstrate that their approach, their model, their techniques were superior in giving computer the capability of performing a specific task, be it recognize an object, produce a spoken word, play a game, but they all agreed that this is the only right question to pursue in AI. Therefore, the focus has been, let's say, slightly more on AI rather than on human beings and their needs. This, however, is a narrow question because there are many moving parts here. Not only is technology changing, so we humans, human individuals and societies are changing as manifested in this very forum that we're attending, as well as the way we think, behave, interact, socialize, or judge, or many other things. All of these are moving. This focus on machine capacities has led to the sidelining of issues that have been central to the well-being of human beings, I believe, and the welfare of human societies and the resilience of our environment. So I'll give an example. So Gabriela Ramos at the beginning, she gave an example of gender, and previous speakers, they talked, especially at the beginning, about the environment. And I would like to stop on the environmental part as well. So the major AI methods today that are being currently used, they're based on processing of ever-increasing amounts of data. And similarly, of course, increasing computing power. This leads to increasing energy consumption and consequential impact on carbon emission, depletion of resources, and deterioration of the environment in general. So, for example, data extraction alone consumes about 10% of energy globally, which is expected to rise to 25% in the coming years. And it is estimated that training one large deep learning model produces about 300,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide. which equals, it is estimated, around 125 round trips flights between New York and Beijing. Now, it is true that algorithms are becoming more efficient. There is indeed considerable success in reducing the amount of compute needed to train a neural network, for example. Now it takes 44 times less computational power to train a neural network than in 2012, mostly thanks to improvements in algorithms. However, at the same time, from 2012 to 2018, the computational power required for deep learning has increased 300,000%, which is definitely not sustainable. At the same time, research shows that in certain contexts, simple algorithms often have close to the same prediction power as deep learning. In such scenarios, the added benefit of such techniques is not worth the big environmental cost, as I mentioned. And not only environmental cost, can be any other cost, like interpretability costs. As you know, there are this idea of black boxes where we don't know what happens inside these kind of algorithms. And even beyond that, in certain scenarios, use of algorithms can provide no additional value at all. So, but nevertheless, at the same time, the other approach still dominates. So in this respect, coming back to this initial old question of can computers do X, the proposal is to change the question. And there is a proposal from Iranian-American scholar Hamid, who says we should change the question to what does it take for computers to do X? Or if you put it differently, to the question, what are the conditions of possibility for computers to do X? What he means here is what are the social, economic, political, cultural, or regulatory conditions for computers to be considered or accepted as doing X? So the conditions of possibility is a philosophical idea, comes from Kant, where he means a necessary framework for the possible appearance of certain entities. Translating it to our subject matter, it is that what has brought AI to this point, and us to the point where we are debating humanity and mutation in this webinar. So this, of course, is not the type of questions that AI practitioners typically tend to ask, but the frontiers of AI have expanded in so many directions that it's becoming increasingly difficult to ignore these kind of questions. The AI community and the rest of us could only ignore these questions at our own peril. So coming back to the example that I gave and go into a solution here, and what we're trying to do with the recommendation and many other things is just one of the examples of this recommendation on the ethics of AI that we're developing at UNESCO. So we introduced, for example, the principle of proportionality and a set of conditions to be satisfied to justify usage of this or that AI method. This can be further expanded to justifying using an AI system as such for a particular purpose, under what circumstances we should consider using AI in any given domain. The essential idea is that use of AI should fit the pursued aims and should not exceed what is necessary to achieve them. And this will require striking a sort of balance between the means used and intended aim. More generally, the recommendation approaches AI ethics as a systematic normative reflection, which even offers a basis to accept or reject the AI technologies, which is also an important point. So, but even beyond that, there are many other questions which will arise and are already arising ethical questions or issues that will need to be addressed. And this reframing of the questions is very important, the question about the technology. So we have to be aware that advances in technologies can be far-reaching in terms of challenges to human beings and even result in the necessity to ensure new rights maybe beyond current frameworks. So I'll also give an example. This is the case for neurotechnologies, for like devices and procedures that are being used to access or monitor or to assess or even manipulate the structure and function of our neural systems. For example, neural data, which is also sometimes called brain data, are becoming a very important data type and even a commodity beyond the medical sector, like in consumer market. So consumer neurotechnology, like digital phenotyping, affective computing, neurogaming, neuromarketing, these are some of domains where this commodity is highly valued. This increasing sort of extra medical availability of this kind of data raises a challenge for ethics and for human rights in general and the future of humanity more globally. And of course, it requires some sort of addressing and including governance. So advances in big data analytics and AI systems might enable even greater capacity to identify patterns and predict outcomes based on the combination of different data sources. So today, there are very few regulations of the sort outside of medical sector or just research. So although some countries do try to develop new legal instruments. So just kind of a glimpse at what kind of possible ethical issues will arise already arising today. And coming back to this idea that we need to reframe the question we ask about the technology itself in order to reply to or find an answer to the questions that are provided for this particular panel. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Carluc. Vous nous invitez à
Thank you,
réfléchir.
Mr. Kalyuk. You're inviting us to rethink about the means and the purpose which is intended. What do we want to do? What can we do? And you are really to really show us about the recommendations on ethics, on what UNESCO is working. Now we are going to Abidjan, where is waiting for us Professor Lazare Paume. Is a professor of biotics at UNESCO. Is president of the University of Wakelana since 2009. He is a philosopher, bioethicist. He's an expert. He has done a lot of work in. He's well known in the international community, and he talk about what is around mankind. What is mankind, and what could be a node? Which is quite unreachable by philosophy or science. And you are going to help us to dig into this issue of what is human and how can we see the AI and the technosciences. Thank you for being with us.
Eh bien, merci. Vous m'entendez?
Oh, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me?
Très bien, professeur.
Yes, we hear you very well. Okay. First of all, thank you for all the speakers who spoke before me. And I want to bring my modest contributions to this debate. First of all, by showing that development of the AI through the reactions of the technophiles or the technophobes, can appear as a provocation. And to answer this provocation, we go from a false idea. And this idea is the one that we already talked about 20 years ago. It was in the year 2000, actually, through an article published in Ivory Coast in our academia. And it's about the transfer of the man functions towards artifacts. What can we transfer? What is transferable? And I believe that everything is working on that level, because what is at stake in this transfer of what is human towards machines? It's to be able to lead us to re-question the representations we have of mankind, to reassess what are the essential questions already talked about during philosophy, human essence, and the meaning of what could be, what is properly human. Okay, so in this transfer, the man's representations are very important. You talked about the Homo faber. Absolutely, it's about man representation. Homo sapiens, Homo economicus, Homo lucax, Homo ludens, Homo negans, Homo technologicus, Homo ethicus. This is all representations of man, but it has to have necessarily an element of response. When it comes to the development of AI, what is it about? First of all, we must understand what can AI can do, or what it intends to do, or what AI consultants want to do with this technical, sophistical object. What can they do? They want to build a machine, a logical machine. We want to develop
des algorithmes
algorithms which will allow to solve complex problems. We want to automate the reasoning. We want to automate certain aspects of thinking, such as certain languages, to have, for example, machine translation. And beyond all this, we want to simulate the human brain. Therefore, this is an opportunity to remind what is one of the scientific purposes of the AI. AI intends to show about human intelligence, make it understood, and to mobilize it. And we need to remember this all the time. Beyond this dimension, as we talked about before, the question of transfer of human functions towards artifacts is about simulating the human brain, and from a great knowledge of the human brain, then we would be tempted to think what would be a fabrication of the human being. It could be a concern. But it's a rejoicing topic for the philosopher. He can find there a means to detect this sphere that we could consider still as an amazing tower of the AI. So invincible human side that cannot be transferred to a machine. So irreducible. That's what I call the properly human. So how can we find the properly human, given that nowadays there are concerns, growing concerns, because we feel that the AI has unveiled the real essence of mankind in the most secret sides of humanity. But we know that now, up to now, there are still regions or parts of humankind, of mankind that cannot be found, or they cannot be computerized. And these parts of the human beings, we find them in feelings. I read some work, a book called Do Robots Make Love? Oh, robots can make some gestures that look like love, but a robot cannot be in love. One of the dimensions which is important and transphysical and secret of humanity is it's the thinking thought, this dialectic thought. Up to now, the humanoid robot cannot access it. There's been some efforts towards it in what we know nowadays with chess games. Okay, the robot managed to win over a great chess player, but it's not yet the integrality of what is going on in our human brains, given the entangling of the brain, all the dimensions of the brain, which is not calculable. You cannot calibrate it. And what is at stake? What is measurable? What is calculable? And what is automatable within us appear microscopical, very, very tiny when it comes to AI. So if you want to understand human beings, AI can help us to understand it so that we can see like a reality, like a technical reality in what we can do and what we cannot do. Therefore, I would like you to remember this about the relationship between man and AI is an enterprise of unveiling of what is within us, which could be automated. And I thank you very much for your attention. Okay. Thank you, Professor, to show us about the algorithmic AI, the emotive intelligence, the social intelligence, which is very much at the heart of the debate and the works of AI and of this missing part to the AI. And it allows us, but not yet. And we can ask for how long. So we cannot reach yet this human node yet. And that would be great when we see all the speakers. So now I'm going to give the floor to the expert who is with us here in Paris. Thank you, Rabbi, Mr. Rabbi. Thank you so much for being with us today to show us, to give us a look, your thoughts about the topic today when it comes to humanism. And we already talked about it. I'm going to introduce you. You're a rabbi of the Judaism in Movement in France. You teach in the Paris Community Center and you are chair of the association Voice of Peace, Voix de la Paix, which promotes dialogue between religious and non-religious convictions within the framework of the Republic. So it's absolutely current. You are the author of The Praise of the Law, L'éloge de la loi, and this year you are publishing I don't know if it's already published. Heureux comme un juif en France, happy like a Jew in France. It's a reflection of an engaged rabbi. We are talking to the man, we're talking to the engaged rabbi, and please help us about this reflection on humanism and IE.
Thank you very much for this organization of the ICCC. Thank you to all the speakers that took the floor. Well, I can also start reflecting on that. Well, the whole talked about that, and it was quite difficult, and I will try to keep it short and simple. So the idea of saying something easy. What are the three main points for our spiritual world in the Western world, and also what man is? And I would also like to share these three perspectives. We will have three criteria which will give us the opportunity to assess the risks and the hazards of AI and technology in general. What are the three main points that we could sum up and the spiritual heritage in the Western world? So conscience, first of all. Well, conscience is something that is also, conscience is a very general word, but this ability to live things in an objectable way and also in a subjective way. A very easy example, if I raise my hand, I can see that, that there is something that is objectivable. For example, I can also measure the speed and I can assess it, and immediately in a parallel way and in a simultaneous way, I live an interior experience. I raise my hand. Well, there is something that is interior. So this is something of which is very difficult to objective. Philosophers talked about that. They talked about the connection between body and the mind and the analysm, Spinoza, for example, and Descartes and the other philosophers. But human conscience gives us the opportunity to live things in an objectable way, and at the same time we can also live them in the same way. So subjectivity and objectivity at the same time. Well, this is a schizophrenia. This is a kind of bliss for us, living events on a double level. And so this metaphor of computer So the way it works is a metaphor of human mind, and so this is intelligence. So we see that there is a kind of reductionism in the way in which we talk about the IT performances. So it's a kind of schizophrenia. So conscience in the double subject and aspect, objectivity and subjectivity, and then a moral heritage coming from Greek philosophy. So the human orientation of mankind is a need for man. So living things on a material level and biological level, this is a problem of Socrates. Well, one of the speakers talked about ancient people, Greeks, for example, was put man between gods and animals. So how can we talk about the way in which men are born? Well, between animals and gods. This is really interesting. In any case, Socrates lived during this period, and he also analyzed the way of man, and he thought that men do not just live for causal reasons. He wants to go somewhere, and there is a need of orienting and guiding their life. Well, our life has no value if it is not analyzed. So it's something external, an idea, for example, an ideal or a willingness just to orient his life. So we see that conscience, which is exteriority and interiority, is just a moral orientation, and this is based for the basis for our Western society. Well, it is very different for Greeks, for example, Aristotle, for example, reason, something that should be cultivated, and then in the Middle Ages it was something different, for example, and so the God was present, and they need to orient all that based on something like that. So this is really fundamental. And then the third aspect, which is blessed, but this is also kind of a kind of a trap for many people. Jean-Pierre Verdon also wrote something about that. So, well, concerning nature and the capacity, the ability, so this idea of creating something, shapes and materials, etc. So Anna Arendt, for example, made a distinction between work and the relations. So we are surrounded by artifacts. So whatever is part of our ecosystem. So this is just the passion. So exteriorizing through nature, whatever, and also the magnum, for example, this space spirit. So solving problems, becoming a technician, for example, and this project is formalized after Descartes as an explicit project of domination of nature with the phrases Vico, for example, said, factum and verum, well, what we do and what we think is converted. So people adapt to a world of artifacts, for example, so we can forget all that. So all these 3 points are part of our heritage. What human beings is the conscience, for example, and so in an objective and subjective way, and also the moral orientation of a man based on an ideal, what is best for him, for example, and also this kind of a tropism for the exteriorization of the world through technical and domination of nature, for example. So having said that, we can say well, men could be a fourth thing. So men don't stay in these limits for Greeks. For example, men between animal and the gods. For example, for hybris. So this ability of a man. And there is a kind of a midrash, which is a Jewish history, so something that is told by God, and this is something that is really the wisdom. Be consult angels, for example, so they are a guarantee of monotage, for example. So this applies to different things. So they ask to truth. It is worth creating a man. Truth was a very, very rude. They said, well, there will be lies in man, etc. And so that we have a compassion, we have cruelty, so we have different values, and every value is based on that. So man will be always weak, for example, and then they talk about that they do not agree. So it is they have enough of this discussion and then create man in any case. At any case, so this is the idea of human adventure. This is a human condition, and I think that the man is in any case something reasonable. So if there are heritages of the European, of the Western thought, so we can't give nature to man. And so if we think about this heritage, we know that there is also this possibility, this technique, and this is an exteriorization of a man, acceleration also of that. And I think also of the benefits in the health sector, security, safety, collective safety and security. This is something which is really promising. And also the risks, something that strikes me. So with the evidence that was highlighted by people, by all the speakers, technology is not neutral. And then Jacques Lu, for example, it is based on ecosystems that can be adapted. So it has a very strong impact thing. For example, and I would say that this is very important. So digitalization, communication, the explosion of distinction of Hannah Arendt with these communication techniques. So this distinction that is a part of our democracy. So we have a public space, so we have democratic space. So the advertising ideas of people investing in this space, and then the Greek policy visibility in the discussion. All these has exploded with social media to enter a kind of a space, as the previous speakers said. So it is a virtual space with different rules. So the idea of reflecting in another way, in an anonymous way, in a repeated way. So saying something, not just to answer all that, it is a kind of arguments, so emotions, and this is also brought about by algorithms that favor all these messages that are not really likely, for example, fake news, etc. So the environment, the cognitive environment, and the human state of people that has completely changed. So this excitation, for example, excitement, for example. So it is a conversation on that with a lot of information, and this is something elitarian. So it is obvious that the classical criteria of conversation, so listening, etc., virtualization, for example, etc. So the idea of all these messages that are vehiculated by the body, and so this anthropological impact, which is quite important. The second aspect, so the ideology itself that is brought about by techniques and actors. So the big four, at the beginning, there is a crossing of different things, for example, with freedom. So in the 60s, for example, so this is something that is really dominating. And is this something that is against the state? So this applies to politics, for example, but there is a willingness of dynamism, of borders, of state nations, and this is very interesting. But all these state nations or nation states is kind of a collective identity, and yeah, living together, hyper individualization of a technique of technology. So something that allows us to live together. And this can be also dangerous. And then also the ideology of data. So this is something that deals with us. So this is the cognitive bias and all the machines. For example, there is not just an idea. I think it is a wrong idea, a very factual idea, and this is something that brings me to awareness. So bringing conscience to the capacity of calculating things, this is a big mistake, in my opinion. Well, so this is fundamental. So knowing something is something, but knowing that it is, well, it is difficult, it is different. And this is a great challenge. This is what makes a difference. As the previous speaker was saying, well, a computer cannot have love. He doesn't know he's having love. I mean, so this is very, very easy. So he can do something, but he doesn't know he's doing something. And this can be also included in the discourse of all the actors. So they just forget this separation, this distinction. So this is another scientific state, and this is a gap between the performance and the conscience. And data, for example, the capacity, so accumulating information, something that is based on ourselves. But the human strength is changing life. I mean, we know that people in a cinema room, they see a comedy and they laugh, and then after leaving the room, they said it was just nice. So taking distance from things also, when we say that men think they have liberty and freedom, and they can, this neuronal sign is sent to muscles before we are aware of it. So this is the last proof that we deal with that. So we have naivety from this point of view, for example. Well, this is the force of human beings, so telling things in another way and justifying a posteriori all these things. So this is a kind of a storytelling ability. So this is a flexibility, and we don't see this as a superiority of data. And then I would like to end with that data. Well, I think that the data questions in a very tangible way our life together. This is a danger with two very easy things, but for which there is also a need to act together. So within democracies, so the state of republic, the status of a word within democracy, with this advertising, so putting everything into a visible space and having a criticism and a discussion on that, and also the opportunity to be anonymous in this. This is something that kills democracy. It is killing really democracy, and also the responsibility of these people, of these supporters. And I think that we don't just have changes from an anthropological point of view, but I think we have two things that are very important that we have to consider them to in order not to destroy our reality. Otherwise, we will have a closure in terms of cognitive aspects. So also for the functioning of algorithms. So no one knows how it works. If I don't know the rules of the game, so knowing the rules of that is a risk for us. and this is a part of our democratic space. So we have a lot of concerns on that, and that we should also raise. Thank you very much. Well, it is really passionate to hear you. We have a lot of different exchanges, and we also have an important opportunity to listen to our speakers, and also we can see how this capacity of reflecting, of taking a distance, and not being in this confusion of machines, all the sectors that you mentioned, all these gives us the opportunity to ask you questions. And before asking all and considering all the questions that were asked by you and all the listeners of this afternoon, well, I would like to have some feedbacks and reactions. Well, we have 6 speakers this afternoon, so we could have some questions and answers among you. Well, I would like to leave you the floor. If you want to take the floor, we still have 30 minutes more or less. So if you want to ask a question and you want to react, you have the floor. Thank you.
Moi, je n'ai pas de question, mais...
Oui, vous avez la parole.
Je n'ai pas de question, mais je...
Nathanael, yes. Well, I would like to go back to the power of thinking. And I think this is something which is really important. And this is one of the questions we should raise nowadays. In Hannah Arendt, for example, this is very interesting in my opinion. Thank you. Thank you. Other reactions, for example, questioning about the condition of human beings, for example, this space of world that we have within us and all the different interventions.
Peut-être que je pourrais dire un petit mot. Simplement, ce qui me frappe, c'est essentiellement...
What's striking for me is the critical side that at last we can have. We couldn't have this type of discussion 10 or 15 years ago, and I'm really happy that we are beginning to discuss on these questions and in real detail. So I think that there are several tools, and I think that we've been around the question quite well. Thank you, Professor. I have a question of interest on the notion of Anthropocene. I was very interested in what said the 2 first speakers about Anthropocene. It allows us to think about a lot of things. My question is open. How can it allow to move forward specifically on this question of man and machine? How can it be a tool, a supplementary tool? Because, you know, I thought about humanism, philosophy, that was my basis for thinking, but how can the Anthropocene thinking help us to think differently on this topic? Yes, this is very important. I think our first speakers talk about these crucial points.
To English now, just to make it a little bit more fluent in English. See, I think that was very interesting, the last point, and what you said about consciousness, about ethical attitude. I think this is very central. And I think in education, this plays a tremendous role. We have to make people aware of the fact what can be done with data. And so I have 4 points which are more concrete than the ones you mentioned, which I liked. They were very interesting. One point is that today more and more data are produced in the world. You know, it's a tremendous amount of money of data. And the question is, to whom belong these data? Who is actually the owner of the data? And this is a very complex question because it relates us to democracy, to human values, and so on. So that would be one point. The other point is that through the digitalization, I think the possibilities of manipulation have increased tremendously. It's not only that it is freedom, as we have often belief, but it's also a question of manipulation. For example, manipulation by the state, if you think of China, but also manipulation of the individual through all kinds of small controls. We have done a little study on youth in 7 countries and 3 continents. How do they cope and how do they live with the new media, with the internet? And that was very interesting. You know, it's integrated. For them, it's part of their daily life. And there's often not a critical distance towards the data. They are a little bit naive in the way they take it as granted. And also the way data are presented. This is so in a manipulative way very often that I think then it needs also much more research. What do they actually do, these data? And if we, just to finish, one little point. The problem is that with the artificial intelligence, that you have so many data and they work on these data, but finally they cannot explain certain decisions. They are, you know, they can make the decision, but there is no, what you said, there's no consciousness, which helps us to understand and give reasons for the decisions. And so in that sense, I think the process of decision making is also very central. It relates to ethical question, to consciousness question you mentioned, and also to the question of future. What kind of future do we imagine? How do we want to project our life? What is it actually, ars vivendi today? And then it's an open another conference. But I think an important one.
Thank you so much, Nathanael. Would you like to add something? Yes, very briefly. The Anthropocene is a concept that can have some boundaries. It's a scientific concept, but it's a political and philosophical concept. It's very large. Therefore, it can be lacking of some operability and calls for more conceptual tools. You can identify some boundaries, indeed, and you can question the operationality of the Anthropocene. However, for me, there is something very solid and interesting. When people say, oh, there's nothing new under the sun, everything has been created. No, I disagree. There is new things under the sun, and it's our relationship with the sun. For example, with the parity system, we are discovering now new things radically. It cannot be thought, it can be thought in reference with the geological phases of the past, but with places of newity, something new, and it's very interesting. Moreover, it's a concept which is widely debated in many reviews or committee of reading, science, etc. When we mobilize this concept of Anthropocene, we bring a whole scientific debate which is very solid, which is contradictory, which is alive, but it's very solid, I believe. And therefore, we have a lot of basis and to think about the prospective side. Afterwards, of course, politically, we need to deploy other concepts of transition, and then you move forward for many. You can hear transition, revolution, etc. And the range is massive. Thank you so much. I suggest that we would take some questions of those who have listened to us in this webinar. I can read two. One of them has a relationship with time. Monique, oh, what about AE? Which revolution when it comes to time? Time of life, time of death. Our question was about like Saint Augustine, what is the human? But what is mankind when it comes to AI and its mutations? We can ask, what is time? And to this question, we could add the question of space, about globalization and what is taking place. Is there still a space for location. And you, Mr. Rabbi, you talk about this through borders and nations. But what can we say about recomposition of time and space? Massive question, yeah?
One way you would say that today the time is destroying the space. You know, it doesn't make a difference if you talk to somebody in Tokyo or next door. So the space, which is very basic to an anthropological experience of us, it doesn't play the same role as it used to play. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that we have a dominance of a linear time, what I called in another context chronocracy. And there are other types of time, for example, the cyclic time of the year and so, or the kairos, which do not play the same role. So I assume that the assumption of time, and that's also in the artificial intelligence, I mean, they celebrate the fact that there's actually operations which don't need any time. But I think this has to be questioned. It's a basic attitude toward life and towards society and towards knowledge, which you can discuss, which is obviously very powerful these days.
I'm thinking of a reflection of Etienne Klein. Time is an artifice which is great, so that nothing would happen at the same time. Okay, let me tell you a story that happened to a friend coming back from Tokyo. He was in a Japanese fast food, which was totally digitalized. So the person through the facial recognition recognizes him. The waiter says, which okay, what do you want? Sorry, he had to answer to the menu. And the smile analyzed by the machine. And when the smile was computerized, you know what? His bank account, had the money taken off. So imagine so many operations in a very, very small time. This is an incremental time, How can you put so many operations in a very, very small amount of time? This is progress. But the question is there on a human level. What did I experience? Did I speak to a waiter? No. Did I speak to the security guard at the entrance? No. Well, you see, it's a bit twisted. It's interesting for the machines, but it's quite different for the human experience, So as well, it's a question we need to ask ourselves. Absolutely. Through this relationship with death and life, can you talk about this, concerning this question, to our listeners? How can it be transformational when it comes to death, when it comes to life, and these technologies too humanistic is a temptation, to push the boundaries so that we cannot envisage anymore that we are going to die, if we are too humanistic. Anybody can answer this question? Yes, indeed. Biotechnologies, technologies, post-transhumanism goes to the sense of denying death. Yes, it's a technical problem. It becomes a technical problem. It's something new when you think that death is a technical problem. And we talked about this, about the importance of relationships, of the experience. It's a denial. That's very disturbing in this concept of human beings who is a priori eternal. But so far, philosophies and religious have said that, human beings are mortal. So there's a big transformation. But however, the human reality remains. Yes, linked to the body. But the images do not die. They are universal. They are universal, but the body will die. So it's a vulnerability. the vulnerability of the body. You know, it's very human. Machines do not suffer. And we need to see this in order to answer what you said before. What is a good life? You know, it's very interlinked. You have to see that if we becoming older and older, I think the question of death becomes more important, and it changes behavior towards life. So this prospect is excellent for a good life. And in the Anthropocene, we talk about death of nature, talk about violence, human beings, and the relationship of man with nature and with our human relationships. I think that we're going to still have 14,000 atomic bombs. Nobody talks about that. It's secret. It's a taboo. We can carry on with this. This is a mortal potential, which is absolutely huge. I have a question for Nathaniel. Nathaniel, you want to say something? Well, I want to say something about Hannah Arendt. She's a great woman of the 20th century. She doesn't say life and death, but she said life versus world. Life versus world. So there is the economic sphere about the life. Life has to be maintained by consumption, and the world, which is a sphere of political and the speech and the whole traffic, you know. And I think that what is at stake, the big issue is think political, this space which is between us from the foundation of logical, and to manage to reposition the world on life, upon life, without it being contrary. And that will create another relationship with death. Okay, but I won't go any further. Thank you so much. I have another question for Professor Paume. You talked about this nuclear of the human. You try to explore it and to make us feel it. This is my question. Question from Gérard. Conscience and sense of responsibilities is about human beings, yeah? And you talk about this nucleus. According to you, new technologies, can't they help to empower, but to destroy as well, maybe the properly human, as you talked about, versus conscious and accountability? What do you think? Yes, we must remember, with the development of the AI, there was a profusion of illusions which were anthropomorphical. People projected on machines features which were human, with the illusion that the machine can reproduce, that the machine can laugh, can decide, can do such and such things, because decision making is linked not only to a chain of reasonings that we can decide, but there is a dimension linked to taking into conscience, to understanding a context and situations which you cannot calculate, which you cannot measure, technically speaking. This is why I'm saying, while you're looking about the evolution of AI, AI consolidates what human beings, proper human beings, you can conscience of self-reflection, for example. The machine can calculate without knowing that it calculates. This is a difference between machine and mankind. Okay, machine can calculate much better than human beings, but human beings can totally realize what they're doing when they make calculations. So I do understand your question. You have to tell this gentlemen, that this idea of development consolidates this part of mankind, which escapes necessarily to machine, which is missing in machines, because it's nothing, you cannot calculate it, you cannot automate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to add a couple of elements. I completely agree with you. This is outside our responsibility. It cannot be deducted. It is not deductible. But what is at stake? Well, the game is kind of breakage from the world. So there is a specific point in time in which decisions are made. So this game is kind of free, and this is not something deductible. This is not part of this chain of deductibility. So this cannot be digitalized. So a machine is not able to do that. It is kind of rupture, and it doesn't deal with the human responsibility. This is anti-human. Just to get back to what our previous speakers were saying. Well, we see our common sense of our speakers, but I'm also I'm also addressing Mr. Maxim that we have a need for recommendations. So on the one hand, when we listen to you, we have a common sense that is expressed, which is also clarified by your expertise. On the other hand, we also have dangers, so ethical recommendations that we need for UNESCO and for our listeners. So is there not this kind of risk, an artificial conscience? We talked about conscience. Well, I would like to ask this question to Mr. Karliuk. Is there a risk from this point of view? Can you give us recommendations for UNESCO, for the work of UNESCO, for our team? So something that can deal with our points, with our, don't we have to go with new technologies and artificial intelligence? Can you give us a couple of recommendations, Mr. Karliuk? What should we do and what shouldn't we do? Thank you. In your opinion.
Thank you very much for your question. First of all, if you allow me, I wanted to react to some other points that were made by previous speakers. So, for instance, the Tokyo example I liked a lot about this machine doing fast lots of operations in time, but also relating to points that Mr. Plane made. In fact, I mean, I think we are how to say, we give too much credit to the machines, in fact. And why I'm saying that is the following. This actually relates to your question as well. Sometimes I think we're giving too much credit. Why? Because in a sense, today, humans are put at the margins of the machine. But so they sort of do what machines cannot do, or could only do with difficult or expensive software programming, or is like not cost effective enough. So this is a very big difference as compared to automation stage that we had previously, historically. So previously, historically, was the other way around. So machines did what humans could not do with ease and efficiency. And now it's absolutely the opposite, because sometimes it costs too much to make some simple tasks that humans can do much easier. So, but at the same time, humans are doing a lot of work which machines are giving credit to. It's also about collection of data, labeling of data. The data point that Mr. Wolff was talking about. This is widely done by humans, but they are often not only not recognized and credit is given to the machines, but they are not even compensated for that. Or is it they're not very well compensated, or they're not compensated at all? And I'll give you one example of such work, which is credit given essentially to machines or to other actors. Like, for example, with all this content that's being generated on social media, people are willingly participating in creation of economic value, which goes to others. To others, and this goes to all social media. So even behind this machine in Tokyo, there's actually a lot of unseen human labor there, often uncompensated. So this is the caution about not giving too much credit to machines. This is one thing. Second thing, with regard to specifically to your question about the recommendation, what we are trying, I mean, again, we are not really given recommendations specifically about these future developments of possible future developments. So yeah, we take them into consideration. We don't. This is one of the reasons we don't give a precise definition of what AI is, as mentioned in this panel. It's kind of hard to define, but also trying to anticipate future developments, and that these developments would be covered by the ethical principles and values given in the recommendation. But this more specific recommendations that we provide, they are more, they're not about the machines themselves, but about certain sectors like culture, like labor, like gender equality, environment, which I talked about. So they're about sectors, not about machines themselves. So they're more about people, not about the machines. And I will just give one of the recommendations, that concrete recommendations where we make, is to effectuate, to create, first of all, create and develop, and then implement in practice an ethical impact assessment, which would allow to anticipate. This is a special tool that we're planning to develop, which will allow anticipate these kind of concerns ex ante, before they even appear. And eventually, if they appear, then we will try to address them through various tools. So this is one of the kind of anticipatory tools that we provide in the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Je vous propose une dernière question très rapide.
Well, I would like to ask you a last question, which is very fast question, a quick question about, mind, about this idea of body, of soul, of spirit, etc., etc. And it's something we talked about that. So this anthropological vision that is rooted in our traditions, humanisms in all different epochs and eras, but also public resources and this Christian vision of man. Well, what about this vision and this heritage of this spirituality? For example, the Christian vision of man, how could this clarify the reflection that we have nowadays about this anthropological impact of new technologies of AI, and what kind of light could we shed on that? In just a couple of words, we just have 5 minutes until the end. Well, Nathanael Wallenhorst, well, I think that every cloud has a silver lining, as we know, so there is always some light also above clouds. So there are a couple of texts that were very important to me. Laudato Si, the encyclica of Pope Francis, and Fratelli Tutti, the other encyclica of Pope Francis. In there, we can see the history of a tradition and also the power of adaptation, just to clarify and to address all the challenges of the world. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Wallenhorst. Is there anyone else who would like to take the floor?
C'était un philosophe israélien, il est mort.
Shafalahud Ziboid is a Jewish philosopher, well, an important political actor. He was also a neurophysician, and this distinction is important when it comes to talking about these problems. It is not the computer, it's the brain that think about that, and there is this gap. So the brain has a neuronal base. They talk, the reductionists talk about skull, a cranium. So there is this kind of mysterium about which Poame was talking. There is a kind of dichotomy that we cannot eliminate. So reductionism and the enemy, so the idea of going against any kind of materiality. So just reducing all that to a juridical basis. Well, I think that this is part of our scientific thinking, and we have to keep this idea. So the idea of embodied thinking, thought. Philosophers talked about that, parallelisms, dualism, etc. The question is still open, that's it. And I think that this is very important for the dynamic of this dialogue and to avoid any kind of reductionism. And the distinction and this kind of unity, that's the mystery, that's it. So we have a distinction and the unity at the same time. Okay, any other experts? Mr. Wolff? Yes, very, very quickly. Well, the idea of soul of human living beings, and then the epitomia, so this feeling, so animals, and then logos, third element, and then another element, spiritual element. Well, I have just given and delivered a conference, a lecture. There will be a book on that, Religion as a Perfection. What is the role played by religion for the development of human being? So just to improve human being, for the improvement of human beings, I think that this is something that could be used to answer this question, just to stay with Socrates, for example. So we know that it exists, but we can't explain it in an easy way. So Thank you very much to everybody. Mr. Parisot, just a couple of things. Professor Parisot, well, we will have another webinar on the 3rd of June. There will be last step of this pathway. So which compass for education. Could you say something about that for this event? Well, just a couple of words. I would just like to tell you that all these questions that were faced today also ask another question: how should we educate young people in a critical way, in a rational way? This is part of this question, the relationship between body and spirit and soul, etc. So for an organization, for UNESCO, what should we promote? What are the priorities? What are the challenges as well? If we think about the technologies and digital technologies in general, just to make everything accessible for educational contents, but this is not, it doesn't mean, well, educational contents doesn't mean educating. So we will see it on the 3rd of June. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Parisot. Thank you to all our speakers. Well, thanks to your contributions, we could get an in-depth insight into anthropological challenges. Well, this idea of technosciences, artificial intelligence. So we will meet on the 3rd of June for the continuation of this meeting. So what compass for education? Thank you very much, and see you on the 3rd of June. Thank you.